Hello, my name is Deja Page, and I have done some research on drug laws for my public speaking class at the University of Indiana Southeast. Today, I will be sharing with you some of my findings in an attempt to help you understand and convince you that these laws are heinous and racially charged. Throughout history, drugs have been a popular focus of legislation, especially in the last 100 years. Before the 1900s, drugs were readily available in storefronts and catalogs for the majority of the population as recreational and medicinal purposes. Since then, there have been several specific laws that restrict the usage, sale, and distributions of these medicines. Current legislation is relinquishing some of those heinous punishments, but they still have yet to acknowledge the fact that the laws created were an effort to restrict the people and citizens of the United States in an effort to push their personal agendas and for economic gain. I asked you to contact your congressman at the end of this speech to help them understand that these laws break up families and communities. According to the History.com website, in the 1890s, the influential Sears and Roebuck catalog included an offer for a syringe and a small amount of cocaine for only $1.50. I will show you some examples of that here in my visual aid. This is an actual excerpt from the catalog that has hypodermic needles for sale. They also had things like cocaine toothache drops for sale. I think that it's important to mention that this was a conservative magazine. The National Institute on Drug Abuse, also known as the NIDA, had a research monograph in 1977, and on page 28, the Sears Roebuck catalog of 1902 promised cures that are still yet to be achieved to this day. They fabricated the idea that there's an instantaneous cure to toothaches, and through these cocaine drops, they could be cured. Even the common brand Bayer & Co. had heroin for sale, readily available to its citizens. And after the beginning of the 20th century came another trending era. American medicine at this time had been lenient and unrefined in professional standards, and you could easily obtain a medical degree. Before the 20th century, a medical degree was easily obtained, and the AMA set out to change that. They set more in-depth expectations on training and education, and they may have had an economic interest in curbing patent medicine sales. This means that they wanted to keep some of the sales for themselves. There was some ethical concern in people self-administering drugs at home. This soon led to strict government legislation. The Opium Exclusion Act in 1909 was an act that restricted the sale, tax, and distribution of opium, but could still be distributed as medicine through the prescription pads of doctors. In 1914, Congress instituted the Harrison Act, which restricted the sale, distribution, and usage of opiates and cocaine, except through the medicine of doctors. In 1919, the 18th Amendment came along and restricted the sale and distribution of intoxicating liquors. This is also known as the Prohibition era. In the same year, there was a National Prohibition Act, aka the Volstead Act. In December 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment that said that the liquors could not be sold or distributed. This also ended the Bureau of Prohibition, according to the Britannica webpage, which was an IRS branch that was in charge of enforcing the prohibition. Following shortly, in 1937, there was a Marijuana Tax Act. The House of Representatives was presented this by Representative Robert L. Doughton of North Carolina. This law was created by Henry Anslinger, who was the head of the Bureau of Narcotics. The history of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics can help be explained by Carrie Lynn Torella, who wrote Hemp versus Marijuana, the Federal Battle to Control the Meaning of Cannabis. The Reefer Madness campaign was started by Harry Anslinger and was a necessity to save the agency and his job during the Great Depression. This act also included a fine up to $2,000 and 5 years in prison if the tax was not paid, which was a lot of money back then. Subsequently, there was President Nixon's War on Drugs in June 1971. He called drugs public enemy number one. Recreational and drug use in the 1960s was likely the cause. Nixon increased the monetary allocation for drug control agencies and also stated a mandatory prison time for certain drug offenses. The Special Action Office for Drug Abuse Prevention, also known as SAO-DAP, headed by Jerome Draff, was also initiated. Drug Enforcement Administration in 1973 became the head force for the war on drugs, also known as the DEA. Was this racially charged? In a 1904 Q&A, President Nixon's domestic policy leader, John Ehrlichman, stated that the war on drugs may have had ulterior motives. He said that this is a war that targeted the anti-war left and black people. To quote, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know that we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Even current legislation in 2010 has some racially charged implications. In that year, the Fair Sentencing Act, also known as the FSA, reduced the consequences of crack cocaine or crack cocaine versus cocaine powder. Before that, it was 100 times the punishment for. It was 100 times the possession of cocaine for the same punishment of 5 or 100 times less grams of crack cocaine, which was popularly used by the black people. In spite of the evidence, there's still continued defense of the racially charged laws. In June 24th, 2018, Scott Gottlieb, MD, the Commissioner of Food and Drugs of the Food and Drug Administration, from May 2017 to April 2019, stated that CBD could be approved, but the rest of the marijuana plant and all of its components were still not recommended. In conclusion, the prison industrial complex generates billions of dollars and perpetuates the cycle of institution to institution, in minority and low income communities. Since Nixon's Scheduling Act of 1971, an attempt to make being black and a hippie illegal, there have been, and even in earlier acts against immigrant groups at the time, there have been multiple hellish enterprises that have enforced the heinous restrictions on drugs and alcohol. The science has proven that most of these drugs are therapeutic and benign in nature, and only the stigmas and oppression have been reinforced. Worst of all, the poor become poorer, the blacks and immigrants become more oppressed, and money hoarding, rich, affluent white people become more rich. Repeat I repeat that it is important to contact your senators and your representatives to help change the laws that continue to oppress U.S. citizens.